When it comes to cancelled Star Wars projects, few characters have had more than Darth Maul. He's second to maybe only Boba Fett, with the unproduced Siege of Mandalore and Sons of Dathomir episode of the Clone Wars that would eventually release as Season 7 in a comic book respectively, or his late tease in Solo, setting up some sort of return to the big screen that would never see the light of day. But covering what I do here, I find myself thinking of the cancelled game from Redfly more than anything. This is the story of the chaotic development of the Darth Maul game, its clashes with George Lucas himself in the last days of LucasArts, its role in the character's revival in the Clone Wars, and how it was almost reborn in a new era. In the early 2000s, games were always trying to make you feel like Darth Maul. Whether it was Raven Software letting players create their own double-bladed lightsaber-wielding Zabrak in Jedi Academy, Pandemic putting him in the Clone Wars long before his return in the animated TV show, or Neversoft letting you drop into Foundry as hard as he dropped Qui-Gon at the end of Phantom Menace, Maul in video games just made sense. Years after all of these as well, when LucasArts began work on the game that would become The Force Unleashed, the team briefly considered Darth Maul as the main character before creating Starkiller. It wasn't until the release of The Force Unleashed 2, however, that a Maul game would finally be put into development. In 2010, LucasArts was in a bit of a freefall. Starkiller's second outing had failed to wow critics, and its 9-month development before that had been disastrous. Then President Daryl Rodriguez departed the studio in May, creative director Hayden Blackman in July, and in August, only 2 months before release, 80 people would be laid off. Put simply, things weren't going well, and new president Paul Megan had his work cut out for him. In the middle of that, however, the Wii version of The Force Unleashed 2 had managed to score 10 points higher on Metacritic than the main versions developed internally. Developer Redfly in Austin created a pitch demo in just 2 weeks, and with limited communication from LucasArts, managed to build many of their own assets while the main game struggled. It was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, especially considering the studio had only really made last-gen and Wii versions of the Ghostbusters game and a Food Network cooking title. As Megan, formerly of Epic, shifted LucasArts towards Unreal and yet to be unveiled next-gen hardware, he also began negotiations with Nintendo for a new IP on their console. While that deal would fall through and development would shift to the main HD consoles, Megan would turn to the quote-unquote Wii guys at Redfly to create a game based on Darth Maul under the codename Damage. Initially, the team operated almost entirely independently, working on a month-to-month contract with LucasArts and designing in the blue sky period of a pre-Phantom Menace story, an area of the EU that felt less explored. Starting out as a Zabrak kidnapped as a child by Sidious, players got to experience the brutality of Sith training over decades. Gradually, the players would be tortured and molded into the silent assassin seen in the film, while carrying out Palpatine's elaborate plans, hunting down Jedi to keep your existence a secret, and, in the game's climax, fighting an unwinnable battle against Sidious, proving he was the superior Dark Lord. With that in-the-shadows approach to story, the team looked to create something similar to the Arkham games. With a focus on stealth and, as director Dan Borth put it frequently in a Reddit AMA, a reverse fear mechanic, the game focused on pushing on the AI and controlling the environment to make them panic. You were the unstoppable, unkillable Mr. X, or, to put it in Star Wars terms, a bit like General Grievous and his introduction in the 2D Clone Wars show. In concept, it seems to be very reactive, in a way that feels like an extension to the Euphoria middleware in The Force Unleashed, where NPCs would grab onto each other and had a will to live, as they put it. This seems to give them real personality, in a way that doesn't feel far off from what Shadows of Mordor would do a few years later. Notably, however, a lot of this was less focused on lightsaber combat, which seems to have been reserved for more one-on-one duels against Jedi who had found Maul out. This seems to have changed, judging by the footage that's been shown to the public, but that Arkham feeling still remained at the core, with a harder, more violent edge. Other iterations will get away from this, but what I really like about this version of Project Damage is the way gameplay acts in service of the story. Exploring how the Sith operated post-Bane and the Rule of Two is always a cool premise, and that dramatic irony of the viewer knows no one here can make it out alive is honestly what I find these prequels and in-betweenquel stories in Star Wars do best. Redfly's ideas are that to a T, exploring the secret Sith Order until it's time to, reveal themselves to the Jedi and have revenge. As prototyping and pre-production continued, however, Redfly became increasingly frustrated with the limited communication they were receiving from LucasArts, and what information they did glean about story and lore sounded admittedly a little odd. While it wasn't framed in connection to the Clone Wars, the team discovered that Maul had survived his encounter with Obi-Wan and now had brand spanking new robot legs. Names like Savage Opress and subtitles like Battle of the Sith Lords were mentioned to Redfly as potential points. LucasArts and Lucasfilm didn't want anything from Clone Wars to leak, but it was clear that Project Damage was now going to involve these new developments. To be honest, when they were assigned the project in October 2010, I'm not sure Megan and LucasArts intended it to be this way, or were even aware of Maul's impending resurrection in Clone Wars. They were still about 6 months out from his tease at the end of Season 3, and the full revival wouldn't happen for almost 2 years. Sam Witwer, who got the role of Maul in the earlier character of the Son because supervising director Dave Filoni was a Force Unleashed fan, wasn't even attached to voice him yet. Its starting life as a new IP with Nintendo as well means I don't necessarily think it was intended as a tie-in to the show. Redfly, in their retrospective with Game Informer that provided much of the information in this video, seems to think they weren't being given the full picture. But judging by how even Dave Filoni talks about Maul's return, it's likely the picture just hadn't developed yet. Gradually, the team learned more of the direction of the character, shifting the game to be in the Clone Wars era, and started to receive more input from Megan and LucasArts to better understand what their expectation was. Team members began to work closely with nearly every aspect of the Lucas Empire, getting feedback from LucasArts and lore context from the animation team, until finally Redfly got an opportunity to sit down with Big George himself. If you've heard one story about the Maul game's development, it's likely this one. It's frankly the perfect George Lucas story, painting him in the final days of his career as a little out there. Famously, those at Redfly were given guidelines on how to talk to Lucas. Never say no, don't mention Starkiller, and most importantly, under no circumstances do you tell him how the Force works. As they're sitting there showing off their game, George scoots together a statue of Darth Maul and Darth Talon, a character from the Star Wars Legacy comic series that Redfly had heard Lucas wanted added to the game, and says, "They're friends." He elaborates by pitching something akin to the then on the air at the time Burn Notice TV show, compares Maul to Sonny from The Godfather, and Darth Talon to Lauren Bacall from the Humphrey Bogart movie To Have and To Have Not.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
There's an obvious problem with this that we'll get to in a minute, but oftentimes when this story is told, these seem like meaningless, inane ramblings from an out-of-touch billionaire who doesn't know movies, let alone video games.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
However, part of me can't help but think that this is always how Lucas has communicated as a filmmaker. The original Star Wars lifts large portions of its ideas from Flash Gordon, Kurosawa, and Westerns to name a few. This continued well into the prequels. I've always personally loved how Kenobi on Kamino feels like a noir film, or the way Vader lumbers off the operating table like Frankenstein. Even the Clone Wars had the odd Godzilla or Lassie-inspired episode. Framing Maul as Sonny and Talon as Bacall, or the two of them like they were in Burn Notice, honestly falls in line with what I'd expect from how George thinks about stories. While I don't necessarily see how Sonny and Maul are similar, I do know that Witwer at least partially based his performance of the character on Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, another Coppola film, so I don't think it's too far off.
You're an errand boy, sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill.
Revenge. I must have revenge.
That being said, the elephant in the room with Redfly and George is, of course, that Talon is from a comic series which stars a descendant of Luke Skywalker in a distant future some 130-ish years after the Battle of Yavin. Maul, of course, existed somewhere between 20 and 30 years before then. This probably wouldn't work out. When told this, Lucas brushed it off, saying it could be a clone or a distant descendant of Maul. As well, on game design, George and LucasArts pictured the world to be more reactive and allowed the player to make decisions on how they wanted to approach missions, not just requiring the stealth approach Redfly had focused in on before. The team left their meeting with Big George feeling dejected. A game they were excited to make and had been working on for months now felt chopped up. Regardless, even before the project was given the go-ahead to go into full production and the two companies came to an agreement on direction, Redfly plugged ahead, growing to about 80 people. Their new story focused on the Maul descendant and Talon taking on legacy comic series Big Bad Darth Krayt and a wide range of out there Sith. The descendant, taking guidance from a Force ghost Maul, believed this new generation of Dark Lords were a disgrace to the idea of the Rule of Two, and was attempting to wipe them out with Talon at his side. From a gameplay perspective, Redfly looked to making the project more reactive like Lucas wanted, fleshing out Talon into a companion that reflected the player's decisions, and creating more personality-driven enemy AI that would improvise in their fight against you in a way that felt similar but bigger in scale to their initial reverse sphere ideas. To alleviate the miscommunication from before, Redfly and LucasArts began working together closely, iterating on their ideas over several weeks spent in San Francisco, with LucasArts going as far to float the idea of an acquisition to the team. Suddenly, LucasArts would go radio silent, and then Redfly in June of 2011 would receive an email with the subject line Maul termination letter. It's a little unclear exactly what happened. Redfly, in that Game Informer article, highly suspects that the cancellation came out of the impending acquisition of Lucasfilm by Disney, but with the benefit of hindsight, that seems to only be half of the story of how the game ended. Just a month before Redfly received their cancellation email, George Lucas and Disney CEO Bob Iger had lunch at the Brown Derby in Disney's Hollywood studios. George was in town for the launch of an update to the Star Tours ride, but Iger had some ulterior motives. Following the successful acquisition of Marvel, Disney was looking to potentially acquire Lucasfilm and Star Wars as well. George, who was now 67 years old, had been thinking about retirement, but still had a handful of projects on the horizon, including new seasons of the Clone Wars and the live-action Star Wars Underworld project that would never see the light of day. He politely turned Iger down, but promised to keep in touch when he was ready. Almost a year later, Red Tails, a film George had been working on for decades, dramatically flopped, and he began discussing retirement more seriously. The first steps in that direction included transitioning longtime producer Kathleen Kennedy into the head of the company, and in order to sweeten the deal for a potential future buyout, begin pre-production work on episodes 7, 8, and 9. According to the Star Wars archive books from 2020, which spoke to George directly about his plans, one of the core aspects of the story treatments he was developing focused on Leia rebuilding the Republic out of the ashes of the Empire and wrestling back control of the galaxy from the criminal underworld, led in part by none other than Darth Maul and his apprentice Darth Talon. Honestly, if it weren't a direct quote, I wouldn't believe it. While George is, once again, floating the timeline on Darth Talon pretty hard here, this feels like an extension of Maul's role in Clone Wars, where he's consolidating powers between the crime syndicates, but also almost exactly what George was pitching to Redfly 2 years before he supposedly started work on these treatments. This is, of course, my speculation. There's a real possibility that the plug was pulled to consolidate resources as a potential buyout loomed on the horizon, but if George turned down Iger a month before Project Damage was canned, it wasn't canceled for the sale to Disney. It was canceled for George's sequel trilogy. It seems to me like Lucas was deep in the weeds developing Maul's character at this time, working alongside Filoni and team on the Clone Wars, at some point got their friends idea about Maul and Talon, and thought it was too good for a game and moved them to his treatments. In the archives, he even refers to Maul as a godfather, not far off from his Sonny reference earlier. I want to reiterate that this is me connecting dots that may not have been there. While Talon was an original character created at Dark Horse and not by the Lucasfilm concept team, there's a possibility that these were all dusty handwritten notes in George's desk somewhere from years prior, and he slotted these characters in these places specifically. Nothing at Lucasfilm is ever truly thrown out, but the way he discusses its inspirations being the post-Iraq War political climate, again the timeline with Disney, and the way he cites Talon specifically, it feels like too big of a coincidence. George, of course, staring down fatherhood once again and questioning whether he wanted to spend another decade making Star Wars movies, passed his treatments and the keys to Lucasfilm over to Disney. with screenwriters Lawrence Kasdan and Michael Arndt iterating and reworking these ideas into what was seen in the final Episode 7. The team over at Redfly, however, found themselves out of work. LucasArts helped them along as much as they could, but it just wasn't enough, and 70% of the studio would be let go. While the new era of Star Wars began with LucasArts closed and the games entering into an exclusivity deal with Electronic Arts, the team, and studio director Dan Borth in particular, found themselves unable to let Maul go. While they had a meeting with Electronic Arts in the lead up to the release of next-gen hardware, EA's attitude was that it clearly wasn't ready for the new generation, so the team quietly in the background began transferring the project to Unreal 4. When the project would come up on Reddit in 2015, Borth would sit down for an AMA, and the project would be fully brought to the light. Game Informer, reaching out to Borth and anonymous developers, released in-development videos in their retrospective. In the wake of these, a small but active Twitter campaign, #WeWantMaul, briefly went viral. However, despite the fan outcry, nothing came from it. Borth and Redfly had little interest in making a spiritual successor of their ideas, and it was made clear by EA that their developments on Star Wars were to remain internal, and from Lucasfilm that the added attention may have gotten on their nerves. In the words of Borth that December, it's just clear it's not going anywhere. I wish I could point to the pieces of this ending up in some other project. So often these canceled games get chopped up and get metal spider legs attached to them and live on as something else. In interviews, Borth discusses their next game, Dawn of Fire, featuring some elements of the Maul project, but as far as I can tell, it never saw the light of day either. Redfly would be acquired by Swedish company Gaming Core, develop a small number of titles including an American Ninja Warrior game on the PS4 and an odd proprietary light gun title before the studio would be quietly closed in 2019. It's really not easy for small studios like Redfly to stay afloat, and I think this is a reminder that even cancellations that are no real fault of the developer can stack up until they're forced to close. That desire to feel like Darth Maul continues, however. It's hard to not think of Project Damage a little bit when tearing through Dathomir and spinning your double-bladed lightsaber in Jedi Fallen Order. And so part of me hopes that we'll see a true Darth Maul simulator someday, especially now that Star Wars games seem more open to experimentation. But even if we do get one, part of me would still wish it was Project Damage.